Welcome back to Notre Dame Day. Thanks again for tuning in. I'm Jackie Layer, and I'm joined on the Notre Dame video hotline by Douglas Cassel, a Notre Dame law professor and human rights scholar, practitioner, and commenter. Last year, Douglas was appointed by the President of Colombia to a bilateral working group in the peace talks between the Colombian government and the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia. The goal was to help negotiate an end to the country's half-century-long civil war, the longest such conflict in the world's history. Douglas joins us now from Mexico City to talk about this. Now, to begin, can you discuss how Notre Dame Law School's motto, educating a different kind of lawyer, might apply to the kind of human rights work you specialize in, Douglas? Thanks again for joining us today.
Thank you. Well, Notre Dame Law School has long had a serious commitment to international human rights law and to protecting the rights and the dignity of some of the most vulnerable people in the world. And in particular, through the Center for Civil and Human Rights founded by Father Ted Esberg back in 1973, the center has a master's program, an LLM, in international human rights law. And I teach courses in that LLM program that now have been put to good use in the peace process in Colombia.
Great. Now tell us a little bit more about the working group you were a part of and what those peace negotiations were like.
Well, whenever there's been a long civil war with atrocities committed by both sides, one of the most difficult issues facing the peace negotiators is what to do about accountability for the war crimes and the crimes against humanity that have been committed. And in the case of Colombia, the principal negotiators had been trying without success for years to come up with a formula that would satisfy the government of Colombia, the rebel groups, and the standards of international law. They were not successful in that search. And so the president of Colombia and the head of the FARC decided to put together a small working group of lawyers, 3 lawyers from each side. And our mandate was to try to come up with a solution that would provide accountability, that would provide recognition and reparations for victims, that would provide an ample measure of truth about the atrocities committed during the war, and it would still enable Colombia to turn the page, sign a peace agreement, and move on to a brighter future.
And the peace agreement that you just mentioned, I understand that the deadline to reach an agreement on other issues in the peace process has just passed. What is the current status of that agreement?
Well, the justice agreement, the agreement on truth, on reparations for victims, on justice for the perpetrators, on non-repetition of the crimes that were committed in the past, was publicly announced and signed at a formal ceremony in Havana, Cuba, back in December. But there are other issues that remain on the table, and the most delicate of those issues are how will the more than 6,000 or 7,000 remaining combatants of the FARC guerrilla group disarm and be safe for them? Because in the past, when guerrillas have disarmed, a number of them, when they tried to enter into civilian political life, found themselves assassinated by right-wing paramilitary groups. So that issue is a very delicate one and is still being negotiated between the parties in Havana. I am hopeful, and the latest information I have from the negotiators is that perhaps within a matter of weeks, they will work out that issue. And when they do, then all of the other agreements that are already on the table, including the justice agreement, will be put together in a package, and there will be a peace agreement for Colombia. Now, that will not be the end of the road, because they will still need to get approval from the Colombian Congress and in a referendum from the Colombian people.
And one last quick question. Now, I know that you mentioned that that peace agreement will hopefully be passed soon, but do you think it's achievable within the foreseeable future to keep that in place?
I do. I think the Colombian people, as any people would be in the circumstances, are tired of civil war and the atrocities related to the civil war that has lasted as long as anybody in Colombia practically is alive today. More than 6 million Colombians have been displaced by the war. More than 220,000 have been killed. It's time for peace, and I'm confident that if a reasonable peace agreement is signed, and that's the only kind of agreement President Santos is prepared to sign, that the Colombian people will support that.
Well, Douglas, thanks so much for joining us on Notre Dame Day from Mexico City. Very interesting stuff there.